Start recording? Yes. Okay. Jai
Avatar
Baba.
Meher Baba ki Jai. How to love God. To love God in the most practical way is to love our fellow beings. If we feel for others in the same way as we feel for our dear ones, we love God. If instead of seeing faults in others, we look within ourselves, we are loving God. If instead of robbing others to help ourselves, we rob ourselves to help others, we are loving God. If we suffer in the suffering of others and feel happy in the happiness of others, we are loving God. If instead of worrying over our own misfortunes, we think of ourselves more fortunate than many, many others, we are loving God. If we endure our lot with patience and contentment, accepting it as His will, we are loving God. If we understand and feel the greatest act of devotion and worship to God is not to hurt or harm any of His beings, we are loving God. To love God as He ought to be loved, we must live for God and die for God, knowing that the goal of all life is to love God and to find Himself as our own self. Avatar Meher Baba ki Jai.
Jai. God, Meher Baba ki Jai. Okay.
Really very profound thoughts.
Indeed. From one profound thought to the other. So, for those of you who don't remember, well, I think all of us right now on the call were there yesterday. So, we'll pick up from where we left off. If you recollect, we were talking on this topic of to what extent does free will play a role, and the way we got there was the fact that we kind of reached a consensus that everything is prescripted. Everything, as in everything of we started with the perfect masters and in fact we started with the avatar's arrival, right? And the fact was that was prescripted. Then we said, hey, even who's going to be a perfect master, when he's going to become one, is all prescripted. And from there, we went to the fact that, hey, that applies to every individualized soul. And everybody is actually going through the motions. There's nothing much to do. So, any further thoughts since we last left it at that point?
Jai Baba.
Yeah.
I think when we talk about prescripted or the whole divine theme mapped out like a computer program or a computer game, the divine game, even though it's prescripted in the big picture, we still have that free will or power of choice in a on a micro level basis. Like for example, that suppose you're traveling from one city to another city, like Chennai to Mumbai by train, then that aspect is pre-scripted. But what you do within the train, whether you want to go to sleep throughout the train or read or chat with your fellow passengers, that power of choice is there. Now, it's a very contextual thing. It is almost paradoxical also, where one way Baba said, no blade of grass moves without my will. Now, it depends on how one interprets that statement. So, I believe many of the statements have to be interpreted based on context, like we look at intention, motive, so on and so forth. So, looking at a human being, even our own births, having read Discourses, God Speaks, and coming from a Oriental, Eastern tradition where we believe in the concept of reincarnation. And we know from the readings in reincarnation and karma that one when the drop soul drops that form, what we call as so-called death, we go to the astral world, and there is a recap. You are looking at yourself, what you have done in your past life when you were a human being, when you had the human form, the gross body. And so there is a kind of like he said, like in a organization, you're looking at your progress report. And again, what happens with the help of guardian angels and other so-called beings who help us to draft our next life, the next birth. And in the next birth, we are basically figuring out what are the sanskaras we need to work on, right? So initially, you're first going through your past life, looking at what we call as the uh, prescript, the script uh, that we had before we were born, and then the script that we actually played, and the end result. So this is a rough way of understanding the reincarnation theory. How do we take? Why do we take multiple births, either as a male or female? As Baba said, every drop soul before self-emancipation is either born in the east or in the west, which we call as the oriental or the occidental, either as a man or a woman, in different cycles of time. You know, so, as we know from Dr. Weiss and regression analysis, that many people, all of us, basically have gone through many incarnations, have played many roles. And so, in that regard, even choosing our own parents, it seems that is something that you decide, where you want to be born, who do you want to be born with. But of course, it happens within the same family. As they say, we all play different roles within the same circle of family, friends, and colleagues. Like when we read about the perfect masters and their inner circle of 12 plus 2, that they are all interconnected, for many lifetimes, especially the inner circle of the Sadgurus. Vis-a-vis the avataric circle is completely different, the 122, the 10 circles. But coming back to the individual, um, uh, we do come with a script, pre-planned script before we are even born. That's very interesting. But then it's just like any business plan, when you start a new company or an ongoing company that has certain projections. So, and then you have the actuals. So, in that regard, we have that free will or power of choice, in our day to day activities, wherever it makes sense. Jai Baba.
I have a
So
few
can you
thoughts.
can you significantly? Sorry, go ahead. Who was that? Go ahead.
Finish that, complete that.
Okay, let me go. So how significantly can I change? I mean, is there? I mean, that analogy helps. What you said, the train, right? So you can't get off the train. You can't change the direction of the train. But yes, I can decide to just sleep it off. I can have conversations. I can just, read a very good book and so on. So it's a limited scope in the context of the sanskaras. The scope of the free will is
Yes.
limited to the sanskaric bindings that I start with, the prarabdha samskaras with which I've
Yes.
taken this human form.
Yes.
Okay, got it,
Right.
Mama.
Regarding this script, actually, there seems to be sort of two scripts. One is the divine script, the other one is the script that we write ourselves by developing our sanskaras. So, from the whim onwards, each individual soul writes its own script by involving in the evolutionary samskaras, then uh, the process of rewinding. There, the free will has a lot of play. So even though it may be pre-scripted, as a conscious, say, living entity, can you be without any, say, thought or actions coming out of those thoughts? It's not possible. So you have that play of that will, even though it may be in the background already pre-scripted, you have that genuineness of doing something new, something different. So depending on your own say, thought process in the mind. So to that extent, the free will always acts, even though with a clear, already say formulated outer say background of a free script as such. So I don't think somebody should become sort of pessimistic, saying that everything is already destined. Why I struggle? That is may not be the proper way of doing things. You have to exert your free will, and that is also scripted. So those who exert that, they have a way different from those who do not exert. That's my take on this. Jai Baba.
Fair, that's a good point. Anybody else before we get back to the reading?
Karthik, I just wanted to add that we have the choice to make a decision on which way we want to go. I mean, in terms of whether we want to add to our sanskaras or we want to just be neutral or work towards dissolving our sanskaras. To that extent, I think we do have a free will.
Correct. And that's the whole journey, and that's the choice, the conscious choice that one keeps making, for which we are reading discourses and then learning to do intelligent action, so on and so forth. Correct.
Perfect. And I also wanted to highlight, the supplement 19, which is, I don't know, I've got a little attached to that supplement 19, real birth and real death. It's really
Yes.
very profound in the sense that there's only one real birth and real death, and all those reincarnation and number of births and deaths in between are just incidents. So that's very, I think, could be relevant here as well. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. Okay.
Jai Baba, just to conclude, based on all three of you that commented on this, that one is like right now we are awake, right? And we are awake for the 16 hours. 16 hours we are awake. And out of the other 8 hours, we know when we go to sleep, we have two states. One is the dream state and one is the sound sleep state. So the interesting observation here is that we are so entangled with the waking state, we believe that life is only about the waking state, the 24 hours waking state, and we don't take that 8 hours of our sleep state seriously as much as the waking state. So another point, as Ashok had said, there is only one real question, as Baba said, and that is the Vim question: Who am I? And that answer is also given: I am God, Analhak Aham Brahmasmi. But that is an intellectual conviction of what life is all about for the human kingdom. And but one has to experience and realize this who am I answer of I am God, which is what is there in that cover page, on the back cover page of God Speaks. And so the other point I wanted to make was that animal kingdom, we see all the different kingdoms, they are almost, you can say, prescripted, like they can't do anything, they are programmed. And only in the human kingdom, as Baba said, we have gone from the age of animal instinct to the age of analytical reasoning mind to the age of intuition. So when we look at the word intuition, it makes clear that intuition is a form of free will or power of choice, where if you only use your analytical reasoning mind, it doesn't lead us anywhere. But if we are able to tap into our intuitive wisdom or intuition, then it seems like the concept of free will or power of choice makes sense out here. Jai Baba.
Yeah, that opens up a good question, what you just said. I agree with all you said. So, is there also a gradual increase in the free will? So, the stone has nothing, and then the animals have a little bit, good animal, bad animal, and so on till we get to the human form where it's most advanced, like consciousness. Is that how we can take it?
Yes,
So that
absolutely. Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
I think that there has to be some kind of a consciousness to have the free will also. Even in the human being, how many people have got the ability to use the free will to the right side? Even though there is a free will, there are gundas, there are bad people who kill others. That's also a free will. So there has to be a right consciousness to do the right or utilize the right free will to evolve or to help them to evolve.
True. So, is that an unconscious? Now, if a person is doing things like which are harmful to others and wrong, is that an unconscious use of free will? He's doing something. He feels
Yes.
in his mind that he's right, right?
N-
In
uh,
most cases, that's how it is. He says there's nothing wrong in what I'm doing.
Okay, I am again asking this question so that like we'll collectively get the answer. My question is that just to add on to whatever Karthik is saying, even though there is a free will, first of all, many people don't understand that there is a free will. The second one is that even if there is a free will, even if the freedom is given for them to take a right decision, they are not able to take the right decision. Is it basically because of their sanskaras or is it because of their experience and exposure?
Jai Baba, I believe that it's a good question. See, it all comes down to two things. First, we know that sanskaras is the culprit for our ego and for any kind of action of thoughts, action of words, action of deeds, which we know create weak, strong, and powerful impressions, respectively. So, the if the sanskaras are dominant, where it is tends towards the wrong aspect, then that sanskara will be experienced definitely and create a new sanskara. So it boils down to what we call as intelligent action, unwinding sanskaras, and unintelligent action, that is spending sanskaras or reacting to a situation. So the question here is, when do we do intelligent action and when do we do unintelligent action? Now, this concept, thanks to Baba's discourses, we can actually drill into it and understand our own daily activities in our day-to-day life. So now that we are aware of these concepts, and we also know that we have lust, greed, and anger, and how do I respond or react? So uh, that's where I believe that through experience, like we have read, from selfishness to selflessness to selfness, there is a process here. We see the method to the madness here, that one has to go through those negative experiences till you get sick of it after many lifetimes. And then you start doing the opposite because it needs to balance that. This is how the divine theme is designed. And then you go beyond that. So that is how I'm looking at it. Jai Baba.
So where is mind here? So can I resign to the fact saying that, okay, I'm unable to take a free will. because of whatever condition that I have put for myself, and it is because of sanskaras. Can I resign? And where is mind playing here?
See, mind is the mental body. It is the repository of sanskaras, and that determines our ego, right? So it all boils down to the ego self, the false I self, and the realized self. See, there is nothing like self realization. We are all self realized. I mean, there is two aspects to our personality when we wake up. One is what we call as Bhagwan, that is the realized self, the God, the divine love. And the other aspect is the ego, which we call the devil or shaitan, the ego personality self. And what is the ego personality self, clinically speaking? Is basically all this accumulated sanskaras. That is why Manonash means sanskaras have to become zero, which means annihilation of the mind. So, mind, sanskaras, ego, all are the same thing, just having different terminologies based on the context that we are speaking about. So mind, as you said, now the question is, am I going to use my mind properly or improperly, is again based on sanskaras, which is again going to direct our free will, power of choice, or we just going to resign to our sanskaric, what do you call, entanglement. Because what we are doing is now trying to unwind sanskaras basically, and it's not happening all the time, because most of the time we are unconscious of our action, we are just reacting and reacting. But as we get more and more self-aware, automatically, we have to make that effort of actually looking at each situation and saying, like, am I doing intelligent action, unwinding sanskaras, or am I doing unintelligent action? So it's a long process. Jai Baba.
So, if I can summarize my understanding, can I say that, like, everybody would have seen or heard that story that elephant is more powerful, but if the elephant was trained during the childhood of tying the leg with a chain, even after removing the chain, it doesn't know how to move around freely. So, even though human being is having lot of power and a free will to do whatever they want to do, we feel that there is or rather there is a conditioning in the mind that the human being are tied, and hence the free will is not being exhibited or utilized.
Um, if I understood your question, yes, there is, if you keep telling somebody you're stupid all the time, like a child, right? And that child basically is listening to this, and even if the child is intelligent, because of the constant verbiage, it makes a very powerful impression, and that conditions that person. Like the example of the elephant, as you said, in the circus, they condition these animals against their own inherent nature, and it's applicable to human beings also. I don't know whether I answered that question. Like,
So if we are agreeing, then the next part is that if the common denominator is we all have a conscious that we have a free will, and we can exhibit or utilize that free will at the right time and right place and for the right situation, doing the right things, there is something which is not allowing us, and understand that conditioning and remove it, then we are all there to be the man god. Is that so?
yeah, I mean, to simplify your question and the way I have interpreted this, to me, we are just player actors. We wake up in the 16 hours. We know we are at a particular stage of life with duties and responsibilities. And of course, we have to be practical. But now, knowing the spiritual quotient of life, we know that the only purpose of being a human being is to answer that question, who am I, and experience that I am God. Because one insight I got was, all of us who are doing this, only God can play this game. Funnily speaking, it's a paradoxical statement. It's like it's for his own amusement. So the way I'm looking at it is there is a script. Today morning we got up. There is a pre-scripted thing that we are in this conversation. We don't know what we are going to converse. The free will power of choice out here is to not say anything, not make any comment, or actually have a lively discussion like this. So there is this aspect that is going on all the time. But behind all this, there is only one goal, which is Manonash. And are we moving towards that goal or not? I think that's a kind of self-awareness we need to be aware of, because everything else is just a kind of a play. And how you play this game daily, in the way we interact with others and the way we interact within our own inner being. So that is how I am looking at it. Jai Baba.
Thank you.
Okay. So,
Okay.
yeah, go ahead.
I feel we have a free will. That's why Baba has given so many instructions how to live, what to do, what not to do, and all that. So we have to use that free will to choose and then live accordingly. Live all the counts of, say, the Janmantra and then the realization and other things. Try to be the realized soul in this Janma itself. That is only through free will and effort. Jai Baba.
Yes, agreed. That's a
Karthik,
good. That's a good evidence that we have created for the existence of free will.
Ashok, you had something?
yeah, I said that today we read how to love God. I think that itself has got a lot of, uh, our principles on our behavior and what to do, how to do. I think that is a good, thing to implement. So we do have a choice to implement that or not to implement that.
Yeah, yeah. So the fact that those instructions exist tell you something. That's Mamadi's point. The fact that it exists means that there is a conscious determination of whether to follow it or not, which is the choice.
Yes.
Which is the existence of the pigment. So that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, echo that. Okay, Jay Baba.
Yeah. All right. Jai Baba. So I think let's get started then with Man God, the part two, State of the Man God. If this,
Go for it.
if we can wrap up on this, yeah, come up. Did you say go ahead, or I thought you were saying something?
Yeah, go ahead. I was just going to comment one thing about Doc Mama said that
Mm-hmm.
yes, the focus has to be on that Manonash and try to get liberated in this life. Actually, the paradoxical aspect is we are all liberated in one way. The only thing is to be detached from the bodies, the gross body, subtle body, mental body. If you actually listen to Ramana Maharshi or Nisargadatta Maharaj, the whole emphasis is that as long as we are attached to our body, gross, subtle, or mental, that feeling that we are not liberated is going to be there. But if you are able to intellectually understand, have this conviction that I am not this body, which is also Baba said, before he dropped his body, I'm not this body, and focus on that self, then I think every moment we are technically liberated once we have that kind of self awareness. The challenge has been how to make it 24 by 7. Jai Baba.
Yep. How to abide in it, Kama.
Good one, good one. Yes, self abundance. Yes. Self realization is over, buddy. It's self abundance
Yes.
every waking
Abide. How do you
moment.
abide in it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So let's continue with the Man God. Part two, State of the Man God. Abba Meher Baba Ki Jai. Subtitle is Becoming God. Of all the subjects of human study, God is the most meaningful. But purely theoretical study of God does not take the aspirant very far toward the real purpose of human life, though it is always better to study God than to be completely ignorant of his existence. To seek God intellectually is infinitely better than to be merely a skeptic or an agnostic. And it is decidedly better to feel God than to study him through the intellect, though even feeling for God is less important than the actual experience of God. However, even the experience of God does not yield the true nature of divinity because God, as the object of experience, remains different from and external to the aspirant. The true nature of God is known to the aspirant only when he attains unity with God by losing himself in his being. Thus, it is better to study him than to be ignorant of him. It is better to feel God than to study him. It is better to experience God than to feel God. And it is better to become God than to experience him. So when you become God, are you in your individualized soul or are you becoming? That's the thought that's running at the back of my mind, but we'll leave that alone.
Jay Baba, I think
Yeah.
this paragraph is probably one of the most important, paragraphs in the whole book, in a sense that here it is showing about each individual's journey. If you look at the 7 to 8 billion people, when we are asking about God, we can actually place ourselves in all these different aspects that Baba described, and the second thing that comes out of it is that true, what it says is that, however, even the experience of God does not yield the true nature of divinity because God, as the object of experience, remains different from and external to the aspirant. I think this is talking about the sixth plane. There is the duality between the subject aspirant and the object God. And seventh plane, when you go, you realize that the self, the drop soul, and the oversoul are one, which is what Ashok, when he read that how to love God, the last postulate talks about the self. So that is an interesting point out here, which comes out that we are, due to Mayavic ignorance, we are always looking at God as an object. We are looking at Baba as an object of desire. But Baba wants us to go beyond that and is saying, I am yourself. You and I are not we, but one. I am God conscious. You are in the process. This is what Baba said, and not that exact words, but one self. This is what the one of the seven realities is. And then this subtitle, becoming God. What is there to become, man? I mean, you are already there. So this challenge of life is being or becoming. You know. So I'm saying, like, if I'm talking to somebody, this is just a joke, but we always say, hello, how are you doing? So I feel like saying, what's up, Bob? Like, being or becoming, you know. So this is the constant challenge that we face on our daily life. Jai Baba.
Okay. Continue. The state of God realization is unmarred by the doubts that cloud the minds of those who are in bondage. Those in bondage are in a constant state of uncertainty about their whence and whither. The God realized, on the other hand, are at the very heart of creation where its source and end are known. The God realized soul knows itself to be God as surely as an ordinary person knows himself to be a human being and not an animal. This subtopic is called supreme certainty. For the God realized, it is not a matter of doubt, belief, self-delusion, or guesswork. It is a matter of supreme and unshakable certainty which needs no external corroborations and remains unaffected by the contradictions of others because it is based upon continuous self-knowledge. This spiritual certainty cannot be challenged by anyone or anything. The realized soul cannot think of itself as anything but God, just as the ordinary person cannot think of himself as being anything except a human being. But the person thinks himself to be what he is not in reality, and the God realized soul knows itself to be what it is in reality. So I think I'll read the last line again. But the person thinks himself to be what he is not in reality, and the God realized soul knows itself to be what it is in reality.
So, Karthik, I just wanted to add that that is the shadow of illusion, that we are trying to think that we are the human being, but yet we are actually the very self, the oversoul is within us.
Correct. Perfect. Okay. Glory of God realization. God realization is the very goal of all creation. All earthly pleasure, however great, is but a fleeting shadow of the eternal bliss of God realization. All worldly knowledge, however comprehensive, is but a distorted reflection of the absolute truth of God realization. All human might, however imposing, is but a fragment of the infinite power of God realization. All that is noble, beautiful, and lovely, all that is great, good, and inspiring in the universe is just an infinitesimal fraction of the unfading and unspeakable glory of God realization.
Jai Baba,
Go ahead.
one is here clearly, it says can you go back to the paragraph? That God realization is the goal of all creation. The very first line, right? Very goal of all creation is God realization. So, right here, the statement, if somebody asks, what is this life all about? Sometimes you go through these doubts. Uh, what is life, especially when you're going through some challenges, physical or mental suffering. We get very disillusioned and think this life is meaningless. But if we understand this particular life, that this whole creation, and Baba has said somewhere else, he calls it the happiness of God realization is the goal. And then the second thing is all worldly knowledge is just a distorted reflection. Is one is material knowledge, laws of matter, and then the spiritual knowledge, laws of spirit. We know that. So in a way, as Baba said, reincarnation is false illusion, and even the stages of involution is real illusion. False illusion plus real illusion is equal to zero. So the paradox out here is we are going back to where we started, the 360 degrees we talked about earlier. You know that. So this whole thing is just a game.
Sorry about that. Price of God realization. The eternal bliss, the infinite power, the unfading glory, and the absolute truth of God realization are not to be had for nothing. The individualized soul has to go through all the travail, the pain, and the struggle of evolution, reincarnation, and involution before it can inherit this treasure, which is hidden at the heart of creation. The price it has to pay for coming into possession of this treasure is its own existence as a separate ego. The limited individuality must disappear entirely if there is to be an entrance into the unlimited state of Godhood. Cough, cough. What's going on here? Huh? Limited individuality must disappear entirely if there is to be an entrance into the unlimited state of God. Okay? Anyway, we'll let that pass. In the ordinary person of the world, the limited individuality, which is identified with a finite name and form, predominates and creates a veil of ignorance over the God within. If this ignorance is to disappear, the limited individual has to surrender his own limited existence. When he goes from the scene without leaving a vestige of his limited life, what remains is God. The surrenderance of limited existence is the surrender of the firmly rooted delusion of having a separate existence. It is not the surrender of anything real. It is the surrenderance of the false and the inheritance of the truth.
Jai Baba Karthik, in the preceding paragraph, there's a word travail. So my question is that would there be a reference or is the Baba alluding to the travails of the new order? Because we all are passing through a real, a new sort of a new world order. The one before that, and a little above.
Yes, in a way it is. You're right.
So the individualized soul has to go through all the travail, the pain, and the struggle of evolution, reincarnation, and evolution before it can inherit this treasure, which is hidden at the heart of creation. This is really, insightful. Probably that's what the whole globe is going through right now.
Yes.
Jai Baba.
Okay. Two aspects of man-God. When a person is crossing the inner planes toward God realization, he becomes successively unconscious of the gross, subtle, and mental worlds, as well as his own gross, subtle, and mental bodies. But after God realization, a few souls again descend or come down and become conscious of the whole creation, as well as their gross, subtle, and mental bodies, without in any way jeopardizing their God consciousness. Only 5 of them function as perfect masters. God, as God alone, is not consciously man. And man, as man alone, is not consciously God. The man God is consciously God as well as man. Yet, by again becoming conscious of creation, the man God does not suffer the slightest deterioration of spiritual status. Man God not caught up in creation. What is spiritually disastrous for the soul still in bondage is not mere consciousness of creation, but the fact that consciousness is caught up in creation because of sanskaras. Thus, consciousness is covered with ignorance, and this prevents the realization of the divinity within. In the same way, what is also spiritually disastrous is not mere consciousness of the bodies, but identification with them due to sanskaras. These sanskaras prevent the realization of the infinite soul, which is the ultimate reality and the basis of all creation. In it alone is to be found the final meaning of the entire creation.
Jai Baba, this paragraph is one of my favorites. I almost memorized this because this contains the essence of how sanskaras affect our perception of the objective phenomenal world of duality and also the subjective aspirant, the inner being. So here clearly is given the reason that the realization of the divinity within is being prevented by sanskaras of and it manifests in two ways. That is false identification with the bodies, gross body, subtle body, mental body by the subject, and getting caught up in objective creation. So first comes the subject, then comes the object. So these two things, the false identification with the bodies and getting caught up in creation, whatever is happening outside during the waking state, is what makes human beings distracted from their real I self. So this is the answer to many of our questions, in a way. Jai Baba.
Jay Baba, I just wanted to take a simple analogy. Basically, our own self is like our mirror, and the sanskaras are like dust which cover the mirror. Would that be a good way of putting it?
Sure. Also, one more thing that you need to be cognizant here is the word consciousness being used, not the soul. It says what is spiritually disastrous for the soul still in bondage. It should be read as what is spiritually disastrous for the consciousness of the soul still in bondage. It's not mere consciousness of creation, but the fact that consciousness is caught up in creation. It's the soul is not caught up in creation because the soul self is like a pure observer witness. This is a key point here, that the soul self doesn't, nothing happens to it. It is only the unique consciousness of each individual drop soul self. And that is what it means, the realization of the divinity within, which is basically the soul self, the self in capital letters, realized self.
Uh, can I have an explanation regarding this sentence? The consciousness is caught up in creation because of sanskaras. How do we clearly understand this? What do you mean by caught up in creation?
Good question, Jai Baba. It basically means, the way I interpret it is, for example, you see the war that is going on, the Afghanistan, stuff that is going on one side. Then you have the COVID that is going on. These are examples of how human consciousness is caught up in all these different aspects, and people get so involved and emotionally charged and say, hey, this is what's going on. And we start judging and criticizing people and countries and communities and religions. So this is clearly what it means, that we are caught up in creation, all those things that are happening outside our own being. See, there are two things happening to us when we wake up. One is all the sanskaras, that is the action of thoughts, words, and deeds that we have to respond or react in our daily activities and relationships. That is one part. The other part is the stuff that is happening outside yourself, in your environment, whether in your locality or outside in another part of the world, where we are caught up with all these news and people are distracted, and they are not focusing on the real truth. The goal of creation is self realization, right there. So that's how I would describe that. Jai Baba.
Thank you, Jai Baba. So we need to be as witness to the happenings of creation, and also think that we are not the body mind complex. These two aspects we have to keep doing, so that leads us to realization.
Fake it till you make it.
Absolutely. I think right on the money. Do you want to be a player in the arena like a gladiator? Or do you want to be in the
Or a spectator.
audience being a pure observer witness? That's it. The 80-20 rule, 80% just be a pure observer witness, 20% be involved in hopefully in intelligent action, wherever you need to be actively participating in some activity. That's how it is.
Jai Baba. The soul in bond, I'll continue. The soul in bondage is tied to the world of forms by the chain of sanskaras, which create the illusion of identification of the soul with the body. The disharmony within consciousness and the distortions in the expression of the divine will arise from sanskaric identification with the bodies and not merely through consciousness of the body. Since the man God is free from all sanskaras, he is constantly conscious of being different from the bodies and uses them harmoniously as mere instruments for the expression of the divine will in all its purity. The bodies are to the man God what a wig is to a bald man. The bald man puts on his wig when he goes to work during the day, and he takes it off when he retires at night. So the man God uses his bodies when he needs them for his work, but he is free of them when he does not need them and knows them to be utterly different from his true being as God.
Jai Baba, I think the explanation about the man God, the qualities of the man God, is relevant here when we were discussing about yoga sanskaras. So if anybody wants to know what yoga sanskaras means, I think the explanation is there in that paragraph. Jai Baba.
Jai Baba, I just wanted to add one more thing is that this explanation on page 278 of God Speaks, I think it says that the stage or aspect of conscious and creation conscious simultaneously, which only the perfect master has it. I mean, the Sadguru. This is a very rare attribute, and which only the man God can achieve. Jai Baba.
And also the Jivan Mukta.
Okay.
Jivan Mukta is also abiding in creation consciousness simultaneously. So simultaneously, both creation consciousness and God consciousness happens with Jivan Mukta and Sadguru or perfect master or man God. The difference is in their function. The Jivan Mukta does not actively participate with the common man. That is the difference. Jai Baba.
Thank you.
That means the Jivan Mukta does not wear a wig.
What?
Mamaji, real subtle humor. Good.
Yeah. Let's continue. Changing shadow of God cannot affect God consciousness. The man God knows himself to be infinite and beyond all forms, and with complete detachment, he can therefore remain conscious of creation without being caught up in it. The falseness of the phenomenal world consists in its not being understood properly, that is, as being an illusory expression of the infinite spirit. Ignorance consists in taking the form as complete in itself without any reference to the infinite spirit of which it is the expression. The man God realizes the truth. He is conscious of the true nature of God as well as the true nature of creation. And yet, this does not involve him in any consciousness of duality, because for him, creation does not exist as anything but the changing shadow of God, who is the only eternal and real existence and who is at the heart of creation. The man God can therefore remain conscious of creation without lessening his God consciousness. And he continues to work in the world of forms for the furtherance of the primary purpose of creation, which is to create full self knowledge or God realization in every soul.
Jai Baba, can you just go up the paragraph? That line, the falseness of the phenomenal world consists in its not being understood properly, that is, as being an illusory expression of the infinite spirit. Right here, it shows you that the world is a stage. The phenomenal world is a stage where we as drop souls have to play this game. So you can't do anything about the phenomenal world, but you have to use it to our own self-emancipation. And that is where the last line, the man God, is basically working. He continues to work in the world of forms for the primary purpose of creation, which is to create full self-knowledge or God realization in every soul. So on a humorous note, now Doc Mama has a choice here, free will or choice. Does he have free will or choice whether he wants to be that man God or he just wants to have God realization and disappear into the formless? Okay, Baba.
Yeah. I would opt to work for the others continuously, if possible.
Yes, I think your medical training has trained you well. Okay, Baba.
Okay. With best wishes towards that goal, let's continue. Man God works through universal mind. When the Sadguru descends into the world of forms from the impersonal aspect of God, he assumes universal mind and he knows, feels, and works through this universal mind. No longer for him is the limited life of the finite mind. No longer for him are the pains and pleasures of duality. No longer for him are the emptiness and the vanity of separative ego. He is consciously one with all life. Through his universal mind, he not only experiences the happiness of all minds, but also their suffering. Since most minds have a great preponderance of suffering over happiness due to ignorance, the suffering that thus comes to the man God because of the condition of others is infinitely greater than the happiness. The suffering of the man God is great, but the infinite bliss of the God state, which he constantly and effortlessly enjoys, supports him in all the suffering that comes to him, leaving him unmoved and unaffected by it.
Okay, Baba. This paragraph is beautiful because I think yesterday somebody was asking what is the universal mind. So it is given this definition here very beautifully. The second thing is that suffering of the man God is great. Now this is very interesting because man God is Sadguru and God man is Avatar. And there are subtle differences we know. If I'm not mistaken, I think in God Speaks or something, Baba, when the avatar goes through suffering, he actually suffers like an ordinary human being. But whereas for the Sadguru, he pretends or he acts. Of course, he takes the sanskaras of the world, but it seems he's suffering. But his infinite bliss helps him to handle this suffering. Whereas with the avatar, he doesn't even use his power or bliss. it is actually his knowledge, infinite knowledge, that helps him to handle the suffering. So I think the analogy out here is that we know that people who are spiritually inclined and know the divine theme of creation are probably able to handle both physical and mental suffering better than the ordinary human being who's not knowledgeable about the whole divine thing. He's just living like a typical, birth school work, that kind of situation. And he gets caught up with his bodies, oh my God, I'm suffering. So I think that is, that is what I got from this particular paragraph, about the aspect of suffering, even for individuals like us. How do we handle suffering, Jai Baba?
Here, one question arises. Why does Avatar suffers but not the Sadguru? Here the explanation is clear for Sadguru that why he doesn't suffer. But what is the explanation for Avatar suffering physically when he is in the field of activity?
My understanding is, see, one is the divine theme, the way it is scripted. How does a Sadguru act? How does an avatar act? How does a Jivan Mukta act? And so on. Okay, that is fixed. Like avatar comes only in male form. Of course, there is nothing like male and female. There is only one self. There is no gender in it. So coming back to your question of avatar suffering, from what I have understood, is that the avatar, as you know, becomes, whereas the Sadguru acts. So, on a humorous note, a Sadguru is a drop soul who has gone through evolution, reincarnation, involution, which involves both physical and mental suffering in terms of, let's say, spiritual suffering, trying to be united with God. He goes through so much of turmoil. Whereas, so when he becomes God realized, why should he go through that process of physical suffering like an avatar, like an ordinary human being? He's done his thing, his sanskaras are zero. He's no more attached to the bodies. He's got a universal mind. He has infinite knowledge, infinite power, infinite bliss, and he's experiencing that. So, in that regard, the Sadguru doesn't have to suffer vis-a-vis the avatar, because the avatar's role is to become like an ordinary human being, which means that he is going to suffer physically like an ordinary human being because of the sanskaras that he needs to work on. That we, the metaphysics of sanskaras of the world. That is why he's coming down to earth. And the other thing is, I also believe personally that he's also showing us how one should handle suffering. Because the knowledge that we have now about reincarnation, about non identification of the bodies, not getting caught up with creation, this helps us whenever we ourselves are going through some kind of physical or mental suffering, or even if we observe somebody else going through physical or mental suffering, because of the spiritual knowledge that we have, that helps us to look at it from a detachment point of view, like a Vivek and Vairagya, rather than being indifferent or cold-blooded.
That seems to explain that. Then we have to learn from the life of an avatar that the purpose of his suffering is for being an enlightening example for the humankind to understand that in spite of being capable of not suffering, he is suffering to make us understand certain aspects in life. Jai Baba.
Yes, to add to what you say, you're correct, absolutely correct. And one more thing which I wanted to mention is that the avatar is also sorry, Baba mentioned once. Somebody asked him like, "Hey, you're the avatar. You said by a flick of a finger you can give self-realization to anyone and anybody." Even in God Speaks, when you read about the qualities of a Jivan Mukta and the Sadguru and the Avatar, these things are mentioned, that they can give self-realization to many and so on and so forth. So Baba said, look, if you don't go through this process, the apparent suffering, the word apparent in capital letters, apparent physical and mental suffering, both in your spiritual journey as well as in your material journey, and after going through that, you become God realized, then you will have that compassion to actually help others. Okay. Only when one goes through that kind of experience, you are able to have empathy or compassion for others who are going through similar experiences that we went through, and we are able to now look at it and help them in that process. So I think that is why, Baba says that God realization is important. And another statement he made was, I think it is in the seven Sahava sayings. I don't have it right now. Remember, the aim of a drop soul is to become perfect so as to make others perfect. And, I don't remember that. But if you remember that quote, that the only purpose of creation or a drop soul is to become perfect so as to help others become perfect.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yes, correct. So, by the way, I just got an insight. The fact that, we've been grappling with another thing for the last 2-3 weeks, right? The individualized soul retaining its individual status even after God realization. Now, another evidence to support this is the avatar himself, right? If the first drop soul that went to state 2B through EAIC fused and became and had an union with God, then how does he come back? So the individualization persists.
Yes.
At least for sure in the case of eternal, in the case of the God, in the case of avatar, and I think for everything else, like we are slowly unraveling. So I just got this insight, so I wanted to share it.
So what you're saying is that, what you're saying is that the avatar is also a drop soul. The Sadgurus are also drop souls, and we are also drop souls going through a process. And if we become God realized, we will maintain our individuality, unlimited individuality.
Unlimited.
When we go into the formless aspect. Sorry, Dr.
And
yes, we all retain, say, unlimited individuality and do not come back. Only avatar comes back.
Correct.
For a purpose. Yes.
Correct. So that's kind of slowly getting in my head. I'm still not there, but see, right in this paragraph where I was, doing the stage cough, right? Where is that? Right here, this is a contradiction, right? The limited individuality must disappear entirely if there is to be an entrance into the unlimited state of Godhood. So here's an example of the contradiction. And also it's our conditioning, right? You go to any spiritual path, the first thing we hear about is union, is merging, is so anyway, let's keep thinking about it, and I think we'll
Jai Baba, one thing that limited individuality is the false I self, the ego. So it clearly says that has to disappear, which is Manonash. The limited individuality must disappear entirely, which is referring to Manonash. That is, sanskaras are the cause for the limited individuality, which is called the false I self or the ego personality self. If there has to be an entrance into the unlimited state of Godhood, which is what is the unlimited individuality, right? The unlimited state of Godhood, or what we call as the realized self.
So I struggle with the word unlimited individuality is just that. How can you be individual and be unlimited?
Right. That is the crux of the matter.
That is again, go ahead.
That is the crux of all the philosophies. in Hinduism also. So everybody comes to that level and then keeps struggling. So each one has his own idea. That's why we have three different, say, ideologies or understanding. Uh, where I put it as Aham Brahmasmi is I am God and there is only one thing, and that is total identity. Individuality is totally lost. That is as for Shankara. But in case of Vishishtadvaita, they still feel that even though we are identical with God, we are a bit separate from God. That is the Sri Vishishtadvaita. Whereas in Dvaita, they are very clear. They say God is different and you are different. You can be a mirror image of the God. So if you see in a mirror, the exact of you is shown in the mirror, but it can never be you. It is only a reflection. That is what is said in Dvaita. So that is where we come. Baba also brings you up to here and leaves you there. I think so. Jai Baba.
I also feel that there is a slight difference between the ultimate source and the individuals. Everybody give an analogy of like your blood cell and that bloodstream, and you are part of that God and so on. But we can be a blood cell, but we can never be a bone marrow which is creating that blood.
Yeah.
We can be a part of the ocean, but we can never be the source which created the ocean.
Yes.
A couple of points. One is when Karthik mentioned the contradiction of the limited individuality and the unlimited individuality. It's another example of paradoxes in life. We have noticed paradoxes both in material knowledge and spiritual knowledge. And the other point I wanted to make, and paradoxes can't be explained with the limited mind. Once you become God realized, where you have the universal mind, then paradoxes, you'll be able to understand or experience what paradoxes are. Just like Baba said, complete surrenderance, complete selfless service, all those things, divine love can only happen after God realization. And no words can describe these states. We can only tend to, kind of express that feeling. And the other point I wanted to make was, for me, it makes a lot of, it makes it easy for me that when we realize that the avatar himself was a drop soul like us, correct? Then it makes it easy to not put the avatar as a separate object, you know. Like he doesn't become the ocean, he represents the ocean. And even we as drop souls, when we become God realized, we will also become, one is the God consciousness state, which is the same whether you're an avatar or Sadguru or Madzu, right? And the only thing is the difference in function. So in one way, all the avatars, when we look at it from a very objective point of view, and from the perspective of the divine theme in God speaks, and realize that yes, he was the first drop soul who became God realized, and then now we are on the process. So it makes our journey much more easier, at least for me.
Okay. So Baba has left us to figure it out. And then to figure it out, we need the universal mind. Hey, this is complex. Okay. So let's continue. The individualized soul has no access to the infinite bliss of the God space, and it is seriously moved and affected by its samskaric happiness and suffering because of its ignorant identification with the limited mind. The man God does not identify himself even with the universal mind, which he assumes when he comes down for the world. The subtitle is Man God Drops Universal Mind After His Mission. He has taken the universal mind only for his mission in the world, and since he uses it solely for his work without identification with it, he remains unaffected by the suffering or happiness that comes to him through it. He drops the universal mind after his work is done. Even when he is working in the world through his universal mind, he knows himself to be the eternal and only God and not the universal mind. Suffering of man-God and the God-man. The union that the man-God has got with God is perfect. I'll repeat, the union that the man-God has with God is perfect. Even when he comes down into duality for his universal work, he remains inseparable from God even for an instant. In his normal state as man, he has to be on the level of all and eat, drink, and suffer like others. Yet, as he retains his godhood even while he does all these things, he constantly experiences peace, bliss, and power. But when God becomes man, he, as the God-man, literally suffers as man. Jesus Christ, as the avatar, did suffer on the cross. However, with the continuous knowledge that his conscious godhood gave him, he knew at the same time that everything in the world of duality is illusion, and he was sustained by this knowledge of his God state. This is the para that probably Kama was referring to in a few minutes earlier.
Yes.
Crucifixion. The God-man experiences all souls as his own. He experiences himself in everything, and his universal mind includes all minds in its scope. The God-man knows himself to be one with all other souls in bondage. Although he knows himself to be identical with God and is thus eternally free, he also knows himself to be one with the other souls in bondage and is thus bound. Though he is conscious of the eternal bliss of his God state, he also experiences infinite suffering owing to the bondage of others whom he knows to be his own form. This is the meaning of Christ's crucifixion. The God-man is, as it were, continuously being crucified, and he is continuously taking births. In the God-man, the purpose of creation has been completely realized. He has nothing to attain for himself by remaining in the world. Yet, he retains his body and continues to use it for emancipating other souls from bondage and helping them attain God consciousness. Even while working in the world of duality, the God-man is in no way limited by duality. In his God state, the duality of I and you is swallowed up in the all-embracing.
Can I stop you here?
Sure.
In the previous paragraph, crucifixion, there is a sentence, I have marked it with a question mark earlier itself. In the God-man, the purpose of creation has been completely realized. What we understand clearly by this statement.
Where is the line? In the God-man,
the purpose of creation has been completely realized. Yeah.
Right.
Hey, Baba, I believe that I think it's a very good question because of the way the sentence is structured. In the God man, the purpose of creation has been completely realized. So we know what the God man is. God man is avatar, and avatar is the first drop soul to become God realized. And avatar is God in human form after that, because he keeps coming back every 700 to 1400 years. So the line purpose of creation has been completely realized means that purpose of creation is God realization. Remember we read earlier in page number 277, the second paragraph, God realization is the very goal of all creation. Okay? And here, which you really nicely pointed out, in the God man, so if we continue that previous sentence that I read, that is the very goal of all creation, and then we say, in the purpose of creation has been completely realized, because the God man is the first drop soul to become God realized. So naturally, the purpose of creation has been fulfilled for the first time, by the first drop soul. That is how I look at this sentence. That because the God man is the avatar, and is the first drop soul who has become God realized, the purpose of creation has been completely realized, which is God realization. I hope I'm making sense. Okay, Baba.
Then with that
Thank you.
idea that you have given, the next two lines also make lot of sense. So first time God in the God man, the purpose of creation has been completely realized, but his subsequent advents, what is the purpose is explained in the next two lines.
Correct. He
Yes,
has nothing
yes.
to attain for himself by
Yes,
remaining in the world, yet he retains his body and continues to use it for emancipating other souls from bondage and helping them attain God consciousness. Not just in the first time, but every time there is an advent.
Yes.
correct. So he is coming frequently, as you said, in every advent, 700 to 1400 years, setting an example. And simultaneously, the Sadgurus are also working for the
Yes.
emancipation of drop souls.
Yes.
Great. Non-duality in the midst of duality. Even while working in the world of duality, the God-man is in no way limited by duality. In his God state, the duality of I and you is swallowed up in the all-embracing divine love. The state of perfection in which the God-man dwells is beyond all forms of duality and opposites. It is a state of unlimited freedom and unimpaired completeness, immortal sweetness, and undying happiness, untarnished divinity, and unhampered creativity. The God man is inseparably united with God forever and dwells in a state of non duality in the very midst of duality. He not only knows himself to be one with all, but also knows himself to be the only one. He consciously descends from the state of being God to the state of experiencing God in everything. Therefore, his dealings in the world of duality not only do not bind him, but reflect the pristine glory of the soul reality, which is God, and contribute towards freeing others from the state of bondage. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.
The last one more sentence is quite
Found
yeah.
chapter.
Yeah.
He not only knows himself to be one with all, but also know himself to be the only one. So how do we interpret this only one? When
He's the
everybody can...
only, yeah, he not only knows himself to be one with all, but also knows himself to be the only one. So I think if you read that everything and nothing, the lover and the beloved, the whole story of what does it mean about the lover and the beloved, here the God man, he not only knows himself to be one with all drop souls, because all drop souls are one self. The God man avatar is also a drop soul, but he is united with the oversoul. So he knows himself to be the only one self. So the self is everywhere. Without the self, where do we start with all this discussion about creation and all that, with avatars and oversoul and all that? There is only one self. That is what is meant when we say self-realization. See, God realization is just a terminology. But God is the self. In reality, we don't know it because we have not reached that stage, but we know it's there. That is why we are pursuing this now. So I think it means the only one self. Without the self, nothing exists. And what is the self? We can't express because it's just like the Parakar Parabrahma state. And from that, or what you call as real everything, that one self can be called as the real everything, within which you have the real nothing, and from the uh, real everything, you have the false everything and the false nothing, from which this whole whim started. There you
what I thought was, say, infinite individuality, the state to be. So many souls who get God realization, they come up to this level and stay there. Whereas only one, that is actual God, that is in the Paratpar Parabrahma or the beyond state. And Avatar knows that he is that one. Is this idea correct?
Not only the avatar, all the God realized souls will realize they are one self. Avatar is just a messenger of God. He
Messenger,
has
of course.
been, yes, he is the messenger of God. He is the representative. That is why Avatar is not God. Avatar is God in human form. And we know that God has many different aspects. Here it says, the pristine glory of the soul reality, which is God. What do you mean by soul reality? How do you explain it? Then we have to go to the seven realities. We call it divine love, we call it truth, we call it self, we call it infinity, and so on. We call it eternal existence, or you call it Satchitananda, infinite power, infinite knowledge, infinite bliss. So many different aspects of God, basically, based on the context of the statement. So I think it all boils down to one word, the realized self, the self.
Yes.
There you go.
Jai Baba. Thank you.
Okay, so I think I have a hard stop. If there's any discussions, please feel free to continue. I'm going to jump off as there is a hardware issue. So I will jump off at this time, but please continue the conversation. I'll try to join on another device.
Jai Baba, I am done. Any questions, any comments? Anybody wants to quickly give the essence of this chapter? Ashok?
One observation in the last paragraph is that for the first time, the word love has come up, divine love.
Okay.
In his God state, the duality of I and you is swallowed up in the all-embracing divine love.
Yes.
Till that
Yes,
time, I
absolutely.
didn't see that love here, I think.
Divine love, yes. Divine love is also mentioned in the chapter on love, which says that divine love is qualitatively different from human love, right? So, and I think in the another stage it says, at this stage, the aspirant has stepped out of the domain of duality and becomes one with God. For divine love is God. When the lover and the beloved are one, that is the end and the beginning. So this is another definition of what is God. Divine love is God.
Jay Baba, I just wanted to add just a couple of sentences which might summarize the chapter. You see, the God, the perfect master, he knows he is the only one, yet he descends, takes all the suffering for mankind. So that's his compassionate nature where he's redeeming, trying to redeem the sufferings of the world and taking the sufferings on his own himself, in the human form. I could say that would be a sort of the summary of this whole chapter.
Yeah, he's just tweaking the operating system so that we can have an easy way out, because we still have to do the work that we need to do. He's not going to do it for us. He's just making the stage much more easier for us to operate.
Exactly. He's giving us a roadmap or a GPS. We have to do the walking. Make sense?
If you say so, then free will has to be there.
Absolutely.
Yes, that's how. That is why I think our intelligent action means we use our
Use
free
of
will.
free will.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely right. I think you've summed it up.
And also free will is only during the waking state of 16 hours.
Yes.
8 hours is effortless sleep if your quality of life in the waking state is good enough. Yes.
Thank you, Jai Baba.
Jai Baba.
Okay, then we will disperse.
Okay, so we can wrap up. Yeah, let's catch up next week. Jai Baba to everybody.
Jai Baba.
Avatar Meher Baba ki jai.
Yes, Jai Baba. Okay.